Good morning. Good morning. There are people here. I'm Robert Keston, Executive Director of Stonewall National Museum, Archives, and Library. Welcome to the 10th Annual SNEP Symposium, Day 3. More people have arrived. I'm just wondering how many of you did the backstroke and how many did the breaststroke. The water level is definitely going down, but in some places things are still kind of messy. So we're going to start right now. It's virtual, it's live. It's from North Carolina with Pride Lives. And so you can also go to Q News. It's streaming on Q News if you want to go on your phone or if you have a laptop or something like that. So you can follow what they're saying and comment and the like. It should be very interesting, and to get a perspective from North Carolina at this particular time, I think is fascinating because of what's going on across this country. Welcome to the librarians. It's always good to see librarians when there are book bans. So, Q News, Pride Lives, and North Carolina, and we'll see you in a little bit. Thank you for being here. It's really, really appreciated.
Good morning, Haley. I think we're waiting on the presentation to be screen to be put up. There we go. Haley, I can't hear. I cannot hear you, Haley. Are you there? Can you hear me, Haley?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can now. Yes. Yes.
Awesome. We can go to slide 1. We'll go ahead and jump right in. Awesome. Sweet. Hopefully everybody can still hear us. I'll go ahead and start us off. Thank you very much for being here and letting us talk a little bit more about Pride Leads. It's something that we've been working on for quite some time now, and exactly what was saying earlier or what was said earlier, especially in the state of North Carolina and all across the United States and the world. Lots of things are in shambles, and so we want to make sure that we are supporting our young people in the best ways possible, and one of these pieces is this Pride Lead piece. So I'll go ahead and jump off with my introduction, and then I'll turn it over to John for his introduction. But my name is Haley Robinson. I am the Community Engagement Manager at Time Out Youth in Charlotte, North Carolina. I've been with the agency for about 5-6 years now. And that's a little bit about me. We'll talk more about all of our roles in just a little bit. But go ahead, John.
Sure. My name's John Councilman. I manage bully prevention and LGBT support. So my department has both those compartments inside. They are separate, but kind of meshed together. I've been in the district for about 25 years now. And, looking at building and supporting our LGBT youth for the last about 15 of those.
Next slide, please. And since we've already done our introductions, we'll go to the next slide. Awesome. So just a little quick agenda, since we will be talking for the next 30-ish minutes with y'all today. a little bit about CMS. You'll learn more about Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools from John. Then we'll navigate through to talk a little bit about Time Out Youth, what our center does, what we do, how we do it, all of those things. And then we'll talk a little bit about how we work together, myself and John, Time Out Youth, CMS as a whole. And then, of course, for what we're here for, to talk especially about Pride Leads and how to establish Pride Leads in your district. And the last piece is final thoughts and questions. So if that feels good, we'll navigate through the next slide.
So with Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools, and you can go ahead to the next slide too, please. In Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools, we have right now 180 schools across our district. So we're one of the top 20 largest school systems. And this presentation is not only about developing Pride Leads into Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools, but I also want to share the journey of doing that so that we can kind of look at all the barriers that we occurred and what this would look like, and it can be done either in a large district, a small district. It really doesn't matter. It's just the purpose of the Pride Leads, what we're doing, how we did it, and a lot of the barriers that we occurred. North Carolina right now, we do have a Democratic governor. However, our whole House and Senate are GOP Republicans. We have a bill called HB 49 that has been put in front. The governor, it is the Don't Say Gay bill that Florida has experienced and know a lot about. We anticipate the governor to veto this bill. However, we just had one of our, and this has been in the news, one of our Democratic leaders flip to the Republican side. So I think that they'll override that veto, and we're going to be facing the same kind of restrictions that you see here in Florida and across other states in the South, especially. As we, move forward in CMS, we have a very strong support for LGBT youth. So I feel privileged being in this position where we do have support from our board right now. We do have support from our general counsel. We have support from our cabinet and leadership team, but it's a kind of a neutral support. And I'll get into that a little bit more as we talk through some of the gaps or challenges we had bringing this position into the district. Our YRBS data, which is at the bottom, our Youth Risk Behavior Survey, I think that there was a session earlier in the conference here that talked through that. We're struggling with the data. We're struggling getting enough kids to take the data to make it weighted. So this last version that we did get back in, it's not weighted data. So we're kind of sorting through what that means and what data that gives us. So it's been a challenge with any kind of data points, especially around our LGBT identified youth. Next slide.
All right, so now to talk a little bit about Time Out Youth, and we can go to the next slide. So Time Out Youth is Charlotte's LGBTQ youth agency, Charlotte, North Carolina, that is. We currently serve ages 13 to 24, and to kind of keep everything brief, a couple of different pieces of our programming and services are on the right-hand side of the screen. So lots of virtual options, Saturday drop-ins, spaces for connection for young people to be, especially when we recognize that a lot of the systems that they are engaging with, whether that's the healthcare system or even family systems, housing spaces, aren't necessarily doing what they need to be doing to support our young people. So we want to make sure that Time Out Youth exists for that connection space and also to support young people through their services, whatever service needs they have. So that is what I call our serious stuff. So education-based services, our housing support, counseling services, all of the things that a young person might need that they may not be able to access in an appropriate manner outside of the walls of Time Out Youth, just because we recognize, especially in states like North Carolina, and since Florida is the main space here, states just we have had that we cannot guarantee a safe space for every single person, but we want to make sure that the space is as safe as possible. And we couldn't really pinpoint an exact year, but around 2010 is when Time Out Youth and Charlotte Mecklenburg schools started really hitting the ground running with all of the fun programming and services that we could offer. I joined the team in 2018, so that is where kind of all of mine and John specifically, partnership has started. And ultimately, what we've done over the past couple of years, we've kind of increased our engagement with our young people and also adults. So both the school service staff, educators, and all the folks who work in the school systems who support our young people. We have reached lots of folks in the last couple of years. Most namely, last year we reached over 1,700 adults through our education-based services, which are our trainings, workshops, consultations, all of the one-on-one conversations, all of the trainings, all of the LGBTQ 101s, safe zone trainings, all of those things. And then also in 2022, we reached over 1,000 students through those school outreach initiatives. So GSA meetings, student events, leadership opportunities, anytime that we can engage with our young people to help them support their schools and support themselves in through those schools and advocate in those spaces, since those are the folks that are the experts in these situations, are our young people. Next slide, please. So what are Pride Leads and how did we get here? Next slide, and I'll let John take it away.
Thank you, Haley. And so in Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools, from my department's position, we were working with the administration on culture and climate to support our LGBT youth. And it was a big task. So what we wanted to do is get a staff member that is certified by our district in every one of the schools so that there is a contact for me and my department to be able to reach out to. So what we did was we designated a Pride Lead in each school to support the unique needs of our LGBT students. The Pride Lead is an existing member already of that school. We prefer the student service department, which is our counselors or our psychologists or social workers, if they're in the schools and they're available. However, it can be any position in that school. We like it to be the student service professionals because they're uniquely qualified to understand the sensitive and confidential nature of disclosures of sexual orientation and gender identity. But what they are assigned to do would be to promote inclusivity with the school community through education. So educating their staff and as well as the students and the peers. They act as a liaison between the school and community resources so that they can work with Time Out Youth and other organizations in our community to support the unique needs of their students, whether it is through the mental health or the LGBT supports at the school for social, emotional, academic success. And they also would be knowledgeable about the federal, state, local, and our district laws and policies relevant to the LGBT community. And again, it's a real strong link for my department to be able to reach out and get a pulse on how our schools are doing, what their needs are, where their gaps are, how we can support them better. Next slide. Haley, did you want to add anything to that? I'm sorry.
For sure. Yeah, so I think that especially when we think about making the connections easier for both John and myself and for the school system and other LGBTQ youth centers, and we can generalize so that way we all talk about how we all get Pride Leads in all of our school districts, right? Another big piece to this too is recognizing that our educators, all of the folks that are listening right now, for most of y'all, I'm assuming are educators, y'all are swamped. We totally recognize that. And so we're also making it easier for our educators to be educated on these topics. We recognize that labels and language is ever changing, policies are ever changing, and the language that is used within those policies are sometimes really vague. And so we want to make sure that there is a specific human in every single school who has that information that we can give them immediately if we need to, on any kind of like policy updates or whatever that looks like. So again, easier for connection for everyone, but also easier for our educators to make sure that they are supported and supporting our young people.
You know, and on the second bullet point here, where it says easier to manage discrimination cases, you know, when our department, so when I do the bully prevention, we also in Charlotte Mecklenburg School have a Title IX department. And sexual harassment as well as gender harassment falls under the Title IX. So a lot of our schools would, if a student with an identity on the LGBT rainbow would face harassment, a lot of times the schools would just go through a normal process of investigating it, fact finding, and trying to get to a resolution. But we weren't getting the data on how many of our kids that were being targeted based on their gender identity, gender expression. So, having a pride lead in the school can help drive an investigation or a fact finding process at the school level to help understand how many LGBT cases we're facing in the school so that we can get more data points on the culture and climate, not only at that school, but across the district. So it's a really helpful point of contact at that school to help the administration, who usually does the investigations around unwanted behaviors, to really focus on how to support LGBT youth when they are the ones that are being impacted.
Absolutely. And the last piece to this also, you mentioned too, John, but the last bullet point is a ripple effect for support, especially in the schools with that history of harm. So making sure that if an educator knows about LGBTQ supports, if an educator is aware of certain policies and procedures, maybe that educator can go talk to their admin and talk to other districts and their friends in other school systems. So again, it's a big ripple effect. So this is just the starting point. Next slide, please. So a lot of our Pride Lead justifications, this one I'll talk a lot about the National School Climate Survey that GLSEN has released. And the next one, John will talk a little bit about YRBS data, which we've heard time and time again throughout this all of the workshops during this conference too. But most namely, the GLSEN National School Climate Survey is something that I use all the time to justify both the Pride Leads in schools, but also the work that we do in the school system, whether that's, again, workshops, consultations, GSA work, supporting GSAs and making sure that educators and admin understand the importance of GSAs. What does it look like for school support for our LGBTQ young people? So if you haven't already heard about the National School Climate Survey, GLSEN is an incredible agency that hosts the National School Climate Survey and also does a lot of work around advocacy days. So there's a really pretty calendar out there. I can definitely send out a link later if you haven't seen it before, but it navigates through advocacy days, advocacy weeks, all of those kinds of things to help folks understand where to uplift voices and what days to uplift voices, if not always. So again, back to the National School Climate Survey, we recognize that a majority, so almost 80% of LGBTQ students face harassment or assault based on LGBTQ identity, and that's both on their perceived identity and their actual identity. So if a young person walks into the school and their peers deem them to be in the LGBTQ community for any kind of reason, then that person is facing the same harassment and assault if another person walked into the school and said, yes, I am gay, or yes, I am trans, no matter their perceived or actual identity. Even if someone is just being labeled as an LGBTQ person, that person is still facing the same assault and harassment in these school systems. Another big piece to the victimization that our young people is facing is also the impact of that victimization. And so we also recognize that folks who were more victimized in the school system or experienced higher levels of that victimization were more likely to miss school, had lower self-esteem, higher levels of depression, felt lower levels of belonging. And beyond all of that, there are so many other outcomes of this victimization that have to do with the success of our young people in the school system. So maybe young people are not wanting to pursue any post-secondary education. Maybe they have lower grade point averages that may change their outcomes to that secondary education or post-secondary education. So lots of outcomes that we are seeing with our young people. And this is exactly the why all of this matters, why supporting our young people, specifically in the school system, absolutely is the most important. And then last piece is that in the 2021 data, they found that less than a quarter, so 23.7%, reported that their school admin was somewhat or very supportive of students. So we recognize, again, the barriers here, and that places a huge need for that additional support. However, I know that's a lot of hard information, right? I think everybody who works in a school system or even works adjacent to a school system can kind of shake their head at this. Like, yeah, this totally makes sense, right? It makes sense that our young people are experiencing these situations, and if they're experiencing these higher levels of victimization, it might make sense that they don't feel belonging to their school community, or that they had lower self-esteem or higher levels of depression. So we recognize that, especially as folks who work, again, in the school system. The last piece to this, though, is kind of a highlight, is that almost all LGBTQ students, so almost 97% of LGBTQ students, could identify at least one staff member supportive of LGBTQ students at their school. So recognizing that if we just have one supportive educator, that changes the outcomes of our young people significantly. So recognizing too, if we aren't in individual schools, if every single supportive person can't go to every single school, right? But how do we know who is the support? How do we make sure that there is that one person in that school system that our LGBTQ young people can at least start with? And that's the beginning. Again, starting with one human in every single school. Next slide, please.
So as we were looking at all the data that shows a need for the supports of our LGBT young people in our schools, it was pretty clear to me, to everybody that's watching this, that our LGBT young people has a higher percent chance of struggling both socially and academically in our schools. And when we looked at a Pride lead position and said, okay, if every school is going to have a designated school Pride lead, we want to make sure that based on that data, that the students have a safe person to go to for questions or concerns related to sexual orientation and or gender identity. That was one of our expected outcomes that we put towards the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Board of Education and our leadership cabinet. We also asked that, this position is going to help teachers and staff have a resource to consult with regarding LGBTQ students, a more inclusive, accepting, and safe environment to foster our school communities in response to changes or attendance and academic performances. And, one of the challenges that we had was they came back and asked for, show us the data. Well, we just saw the data, but that wasn't the data that they wanted for some reason. So we had to really go back and look at what is our audience, who is our audience, how can I get our cabinet, our leadership in our district to accept and sign off and say, yes, we are going to have a Pride lead position in all of our schools. So our YRBS data, there's some data in there and some data points that we can use, but what we really ended up using was that the YRBS data suggested that students who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual are nearly 4 times as likely to engage in self-harm behaviors than their heterosexual peers. That was the data point that we were able to convince our cabinet leadership to accept this Pride lead position. It wouldn't have been the data point that I used or wanted to see, but it is the data point that they wanted to see. So as we showed them all this data and it just wasn't moving their needle, the youth risk behavior survey around self-harm was the one that used the needle. So we just had to keep finding pieces, finding components of data that would move whoever is those decision makers, and that's what we fell on. So it was frustrating and a challenge, but we were able to end up using that, to get this position in. Next slide, please. Haley, I'm having trouble seeing this one.
Oh, I can jump in. I can explain it if you want me to. This is actually a really cool graphic that John actually had sent me over when we were talking about how to justify Pride leads and what this looks like for all of our folks, right? And so this is actually by the School of Law, the Williams Institute. And this slide shows kind of how many folks are how many trans folks are in each state. Of course, we recognize we can't ask every single person, and this number can change pretty regularly. But we saw that North Carolina, it's 1.7% of the state population, which means that 8,500 trans young people are in the state of North Carolina. So whenever we're talking about the Pride leads and the justification of those Pride leads, we're not talking, a lot of times that's what we hear, whenever we're talking about supporting LGBTQ young people. Folks are like, oh, well, this is just like one or two young people, or I've never had a trans young people in my school. And it's like, well, maybe you haven't, but maybe they're just not out yet, right? And so this number, because it's such a huge number in terms of just kind of, recognizing 8,500 is a lot of folks. Imagine 8,500 folks in one singular room, right? And so this is another big piece to our justification, is this specific statistic is 1.727% of the state is, or young people are trans in the state of North Carolina. And you can also go online for your individual states and navigate through all of the national and regional estimates, the trans adults by state and trans youth by state as well. So this was just another really cool graphic that kind of helped us navigate and push the needle a little bit further, as John likes to say. Any other additional?
Yeah, there was, so, and I can actually scroll that open with my fingers. I didn't know I could do that. It's awesome. So, and also, one of the data points that we also pushed forward were, for our department in our state, we have a process that a student can request a name change, and we honor that. This year we have right around 140,000 students currently attending K through 12 with some preschool sprinkled in there also. So about 140,000 kids. And we openly transitioned over 300 trans students this year alone. So, our population is growing. I think it's growing because of the Pride leads and providing a environment and a culture that the kids feel safe. The families of our trans students feel safe and have a contact to the school as well as my department to be able to answer questions and help build support plans and everything like that. So our population, when I looked at this, it surprised me that 1.27%, but whenever I look at the numbers that are transitioning in our school system, it is definitely increasing. Next slide. So we talked a little bit of, well, go ahead, Haley, I'm sorry.
Perfect. A lot of the things that we have talked about ultimately have led us to say, there's a lot of things that we have done or that we could do because we're in Charlotte, a bigger city, because of our partnership with the school district and also with Time Out Youth. But we also recognize a lot of the barriers that we've also ran into, most namely policies. So I'll talk about the policies and then John can jump into the funding and data pieces to this. But exactly like John said earlier about SB 49, that is North Carolina's Don't Say Gay bill. And so I'm sure all of y'all recognize there's so many other Don't Say Gay bills. There's so many other anti-trans and anti-LGBTQ bills that are happening across the United States and beyond. We also heard in a session yesterday that there's over 800 bills, anti-LGBTQ legislation bills that have been posted even just this year. So SB 49 is one of the ones that we are watching here in North Carolina. couple of the other ones that we're watching too is HB 358, which is sports restrictions, and then also SB 514 and SB 515, which criminalizes trans affirming care, most namely for folks under the age of 18. And so we're watching all of these bills just to see what happens with those. If they do pass, then that's something that John and I can work with, and other folks in our area can work to figure out how to support our young people with those bills. So this is a huge barrier that we're facing, is what the legislation says about LGBTQ folks, and also recognizing that even if these bills don't pass, what does that look like for the general stigma of LGBTQ folks continuing? So that's another big barrier that we're facing on. And I'll let John take it over with funding and data.
Sure, and the funding piece is another barrier that we have because, with audits and how we use our money as a public education, and I'm sure that, in North Carolina, it's a little bit more liberal to have funding sources to support LGBT initiatives. However, we still are restricted. So I think it's really important to find a way to fund different initiatives, and that's where it's really helpful to have bully prevention and LGBT supports in the same department for us, because a lot of the funding I can write through for bully prevention supports, and we can make it make sense without really, I guess, advertising that this is where the money's going. We're actually using it for, like, even when we work with Time Out Youth and we contract with different programs or supports with a community organization like Time Out Youth, we can write that into a bully prevention initiative that helps get less, I think, questions back on how we're spending that money. So it's just a little bit of a shell game that we can play using bully prevention. As far as the data piece and the Pride leads, we talked a lot about data, but we still, as a district, find it very difficult to get the data and have real data for our LGBT students, because our district still looks at data as binary system, male, females. So it becomes a challenge on trying to lump other genders into this data for supports. And with HB 49, the new bill that's up in the NC legislature, it brings forth that. Oh, and by the way, HB 49 is being titled the Parent Bill of Rights is what they're titling it. So what it does is, if we want to do a survey with the students, we can no longer do an the opt out, where we can send a survey, and if they don't sign, then they're automatically able to take that survey. This HB 49 bill, they have to opt in. So we would have to get parental permission with a signature to do any kind of surveys on our students. So it's going to be more of a challenge when this passes. Next slide.
And I'll jump in for this one. So
this is the important one here. This is really fun. This is a good one.
So the next big piece, and we'll quickly do this since we have about 7 more minutes left in our presentation. But another big piece to the requirements for Pride leads is trainings, and making sure that our Pride leads have, again, those supports to support our young people and support their young people. So the Pride leads will be participating, or do participate, in a self-guided trainings completed via Canvas. So this can also be recognized in any other platform that y'all use, any learning modules that y'all use. But these are self-guided trainings, and we are actually working again with another partner called the Carolinas Care Partnership to be re-releasing this in the fall. So we are reshaping what this self-guided training can look like and will look like. And so we are super pumped about the additional partnership with Carolinas Care Partnership to make sure that our Pride leads are most supported. And I'll let John add more to it.
Yeah, so the training itself is it's an 8-hour totals of training where we look at 4 hours that are self-paced and 4 hours in person. We are building these through Canvas. We're excited we have to pull them off Canvas because we're reworking them and adding a couple more modules to them, but they'll be released in August. And they're available. They'll be available to anybody. So if you're interested in it, we're using Canvas. If your school district has Canvas, please let us know. We're not charging anything. These are just something we want to build and provide for other districts to use. But it is a training module that helps kind of create a certification for our schools so that we know that if you are certified in Brave Space, you are really certified in helping support the LGBT youth within there, going through the classes. The families and the youth that are in the schools can know that if you are certified as a Brave Space, that means that there is somebody there that really knows how to support you, how to support your family, has the resources in place. And it's just something that we're really excited about moving into our schools with the training piece so that we don't have just stickers on the wall saying, hey, this is a safe space. No, this is a trained, informed individual that's creating brave spaces in all of our schools. I don't know if you want to get into any of the topics. I know we're running out of time, Haley, but
Yeah, our next slide actually talks about the specific topics. It really navigates through this idea that we are shifting away from this safe space and talking more about a brave space, both for our young people and for our educators as well. And so this talks a little bit about the specific modules. So y'all can definitely take this and run with it. But this is kind of how we broke down all of the content that goes in with the trainings for our Pride leads. So making sure that folks have a good understanding of history, both with labels and language, with all of the queer political action items that have happened, of course, namely Stonewall, but then all the other smaller political action items that either young people have questions about or to get a better sense of the understanding of what LGBTQ folks have faced over the last 100+ years, right? And then we navigate through to statistics, again, the why it matters, talking most namely about, employment industry, housing statistics, family support statistics, definitely GLSEN. Again, I know I've named them lots of times, but I love our folks at GLSEN. And then labels and language, talking about key terms, gender terms, orientation terms, making sure that folks have that language to appropriately talk to their young people. That is one of the biggest pieces to this. We hear a lot of times that, especially educators, they want to start having these conversations with their young people. They just don't know what words to use or what words not to use, right? And so that's exactly what we get to talk about here whenever we're talking about labels and language. And then the last piece is all about best practices. So those concrete ways in which to support our young people, both in the school system and outside of the school system as well. And then the last pieces with that is also resources, and then a huge part for question and answer. And so especially with the in-person piece to these the trainings for Pride leads, making sure that educators have a huge chunk of time to ask any kind of specific questions that they have, whether that's about labels and language, a specific case in their school, whatever it looks like for that specific educator. We want to make sure that they are completely supported before they walk outside of that room from us. Any additions for that, John?
No, I think you covered it really well. I mean, the thing I would add is, the whole Brave Space kind of certification. We really look at using our professionals to vet it and make sure that everything's in line before we release it and everything. So even when we add our next module, and this summer we will have teams of people working through that, making sure everything's all right, we're not missing anything. It's a pretty involved process of building these modules because we want to make sure that the Brave Space certification process is really front and center to supporting our kids and making sure that all of the pieces and components are in there, built in a way that is needed for that.
Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Awesome. So very quickly, I'll navigate through this and then we'll talk for a few seconds about the next piece. But for establishing your Pride leads locally, here are just kind of a few things that we did and kind of the steps that we took that you can do in your districts. Of course, still reach out to us for any questions. We want to make sure that y'all are supported also if you want to do these Pride leads. The biggest pieces are noting barriers, like we said, with either data or funding or laws, policies, what your districts look like, which we'll talk about in just a second. And the next biggest piece is presenting the idea, getting those supports and presenting the information to folks who are hopefully going to support this initiative. Then naming your leads. That's another big piece to this. We can definitely talk through what that looks like on an individual level and on a school-based level. But naming your leads. Who are the individual people in the school system that you want to start with? And then accessing the training and training the leads as well. So making sure that your leads have all of that information. And we'll go to the next slide to wrap up the conversation. This form, we can also send this out too, but if you want to learn more whenever we do repost the training on Canvas, hopefully we will be able to download the Canvas and upload the Canvas or the Canvas course and upload it into another Canvas. But you can absolutely use your phone or visit the bit.ly link on the screen here to fill out a quick form if you want to learn a little bit more whenever we do re-release our course as well. Next slide, please. And then a couple of frequently asked questions that we're actually going, for the sake of time, if you're okay with it too, John, we're going to skip this and talk a little bit more about what happens in specific schools. Cool with that, John?
Yeah, yes, I am. Yep.
Perfect. So in an in-person world, we would have you break out into a small group. So raising your hand if you have a supportive district, an unsupportive district, a district that's on the fence. So this is actually a big piece to this conversation too, recognizing that Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools is a very supportive district. At Time Out Youth, I serve 7 counties and 14 districts, and all 14 of those districts work very differently. Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools is one of those that has folks like John in the school system who are there to help with bullying supports, help with LGBTQ youth supports. So if you have a supportive district, that's incredible. If you have an unsupportive district, we can work with that. So recognizing that every single district will work very differently. So definitely keep reflecting on what your district looks like or what your individual school looks like as well, because we also recognize that even in a very supportive district, the school system can look very different. Or in a very unsupportive district, maybe you do have the most supportive school in that district. So definitely keep reflecting on that. So we're not, again, doing the whole 15 minutes and come back to us, but keep reflecting on all of those things. Next slide, please. And my friends, if there are any questions, this day with y'all and tomorrow as well. So if y'all have any questions, please let us know. We are thankful to do this work with everybody, and I am just honored to be a part of supporting LGBTQ young people with all the people in the room, virtually and also in person as well. So keep us posted for everything that y'all need. We are just thankful to be here.
And thank you, Haley. Thank you so much for being a great partner. And throughout the presentation, I just want to let you also know that I lost sound here and there, so there might have been some dead time trying to catch up on what was going on, but I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
We did it. It wouldn't be a true virtual space if there weren't some tech stuff. So you know what? We worked through it together.
Yep. Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
You just have to love technology. So, the person who was going to present next arrived at 5:30 this morning and has just gotten to their hotel, so we're going to do something else first. But I am to tell you that there is no Wi-Fi, but you can use your telephone hotspot if you have one or someone else has one. If you want to follow things, you can go to youtube.com/Q News, excuse me, Q News Tonight, and you can then live stream the entire proceedings there. And what we're going to do now is a little out of order, but nonetheless, possibly, can we use this one? I don't even think we really need it, but it might just make it a little bit easier, is we're going to talk about the creation of the National Task Force, which some of you are aware of and some of you may not be aware of. The National Task Force is an effort on our part to keep a dialogue going year-round and to include people who are leaders in the community, our community, the LGBTQIA+ community, educators, librarians, administrators, teachers, and others on a year-round basis, working with them and their school districts and their community organizations to try and address root causes for problems. All too often, instead of dealing with root causes, we spend a lot of time putting Band-Aids on things. I think most of us realize that Band-Aids don't work. Band-Aids delay, Band-Aids pretend that we're doing something that we're not really doing, and Band-Aids have a tendency to skew our attention so that we're no longer paying attention to the things that matter. This task force will try to nail down, through the perspective of the group, what are the root causes? Why is this happening? It doesn't mean that we'll be able to solve it immediately, but it means that we can start ripping off Band-Aids. If we don't get rid of the Band-Aids, we will never, ever see what's underneath them, and we will never deal with the issues that are facing us. We see it on guns, we see it on mental health, we see it on so many things. We've heard it in the presentations over the last 2 days. We're dealing with this because we can't actually deal with that. We're dealing with this because we can't deal with that. It's time for us to say what the problems are and address them. And in our community, it gets so complicated because so many people have to live in fear, act in fear, and carry out their daily lives in fear. When trans people are being killed on a regular basis, there's not room to put Band-Aids on it and pretend that we're addressing that problem when we're not addressing that problem. I'm hoping that the task force will be successful. We do have people from the unions and from a few school districts, from some school boards, and we've also heard interest from parent groups. I'm hoping that most importantly for us, that students and teachers themselves will want to sign up. There are QR codes in the front that will allow you to sign on if you want to join the task force and get additional information. And for this period of time, since we have a little bit of time, I want to ask people what they think we should take on first in terms of identifying this. The task force will meet via Zoom 4 times a year, but there will be subcommittees that will work when the subcommittees want to on specific issues. Once again, on root cause issues, we're not interested right now in dealing with the other stuff. The other stuff is already there, and people are moving through the other stuff. But what is it that we can do that will actually make a difference? A long-term difference, even though it can be painful, even though it can be difficult, but we understand quite clearly that what we're doing now is not working in the way we would like it to work. Otherwise, we wouldn't have to be doing best practices for how do you deal with kids that have been in schools since there were kids, since there were schools. Because we do things piecemeal, we do things one problem at a time with ever really recognizing what's at the base of that. What is the cause of it? Is it the family? Is it the community? Is it the traditions? What is it? And is it something that needs to be changed? Is it something that can be fixed? Is it something that we can do something about? Or is it something that we have to recognize as a systemic problem that may take generations to cure? So, I extend this mic to anyone who wants to say something, voice your opinions. This is for all of us. This isn't for me. This isn't for Stonewall by itself. We're just taking the lead on this because from our perspective, after 10 years of this, The root causes rarely get discussed, and the root causes rarely get acted upon. So, anybody want to say something? Oh, come on. Good.
So I think, I'm Tina Delafay. I work for Leading Educators, which is an educational nonprofit focused on anti-racist and liberatory education in schools. So I think one of the root causes is we take a remedial or crisis approach to things instead of a developmental or proactive approach. So I think, how do schools set up the culture? How do teachers teach in an anti-racist way, a liberatory or queer inclusive way from the beginning, so that you are mitigating problems before they even happen? I was also a school counselor, and so the last thing you want to do is be dealing with crises. You want to do tier one, like whole group support, and then just have to deal with those smaller issues when they arise. But I think that goes with the second part, which is like, what support can be offered to districts to know what is within your legal rights, or like who's there to support you, who has your back when you engage in this work, which unfortunately is just necessary, but now it also has to be brave work. So what can we do to have more inclusive curriculums and inclusive classroom cultures in schools, and then how do we protect ourselves from the pushback that we may get from doing that?
Thank you. Anybody else? Somebody. Do I have to? I'll just put someone on the spot. Okay.
Hi, I'm Ty. I teach in Chicago Public Schools. Chicago, sorry. My mic technique is not very good. One of the things, a lot of my work outside of schools is focused on child studies, and so I wonder if it would benefit us to think about the issues facing queer youth as youth issues in as much as they are queer issues. And so what would it look like? I think this approach is incomplete unless we're thinking about expanding youth political participation kind of generally, right? Increasing youth rights to health care, and greater youth autonomy, right? Until we do that alongside this work, then kids are only going to be enabled to the extent that the adults around them enable them. So I wonder if there's a way to think about it, not just in a queer framework, but through the lens of child issues or children's rights.
That's good. It's also like when we look at problems, if you work in housing, you think that housing is the number one problem. If everybody has a home, then everything is okay. And then if you work in healthcare, well, no, a home is great, but if you don't have your health, then nothing is good. Then there are people who are in education, some people, and they say, no, you have to be educated before you worry about housing and health. But we know that if you're educated, then you're more likely to take care of your health. So those two problems, what are the things that get us there? So I think that your point is well taken, as is yours. Look at the foundations. What we did at our institution is, when we thought we were having some problems, we started to look at how could the Universal Declaration of Human Rights be the foundational document that we worked off of. So when you start with everyone is born free and equal, where do you go from there? And then the last of the 30 articles in the Declaration says that no other article can override another article. So therefore, my rights can never override your rights. It makes it a little bit difficult to operate until you get used to it, because there are 30 of them. But once you realize that my rights end at the tip of my nose or the tip of my toes, where your rights begin, it changes the way you start to think about other people. So for me, that is somewhat foundational, because human dignity is the one thing that we have to protect from day one till the last breath. I like that as a foundational piece, but it doesn't necessarily tell us how to get to the root causes of everything. It doesn't necessarily tell us what the first steps are. It just lets us understand that if we first start off with everybody has to be treated with the same dignity, we're at least have a starting point. It's not as easy to hear as you. But they're kids that aren't. No theory. That has to be worked out by the task force. The task force is anybody who joins the task force. Based on being an educator, based on being an administrator, based on being a parent, based on being a student. We're just telling you now, there are QR codes. If you want to sign up, you can sign up. Only people who are going to be dedicated are going to stay involved. It is self-selection. We will, as a pool, decide if there are people who should be invited that have not signed up, have not heard about it. But it has to come from people who are committed. I think that that's the way most things start that have been successful.
I think you have to look a little bit outside of the school building, because a lot of this homophobia and transphobia is rooted in religion and the sins involved with 60 So I think that whatever you do, if you're going to get a task force, you have to get supportive religious leaders. You have to have a committee that's not just education-based, but based with people who really are going to make a difference. And I just use the religious leaders as an example. So you have to think about what's driving the negativity and turn over the stones that are going to slowly turn the tide. And also, of course, around election time, we really need to get out there and get everybody on board to, make calls and things like that. But I think that we need to get religious leaders involved as well.
Well, I mean, I fully agree with that. But a school is a representation of the community that it serves. So I think that everybody who contributes to any community would be welcome if they come with the right framework, which is to make a positive change. No, I agree. I'm not talking about necessarily a person that doesn't. It also depends what role they play. I mean, it could be the head of the women's group at a religious group or something like that, where they do have a pulpit even though they may not be on the stage every day. So yes, absolutely. But religion clearly has been a root cause of things for a very long time, but it's also not just the LGBTQIA plus community. A lot of these root causes are for everybody. Housing, healthcare, these are access to education, access to the criminal justice system. I mean, these things go beyond any one community. So that's why I'm saying, we can look from one community to another, but does that allow us to get to every root cause, or does that make it more difficult to get to the root causes? So yes, we know children are committing suicide or threatening to commit suicide or trying to commit suicide. We know that people from our community are more likely, but they're not the only ones. So what is there another cause? Bullying does stretch beyond any one targeted community. I mean, it was interesting, I guess it was almost exactly a year ago, maybe, that there were pamphlets thrown on lawns across Sarasota talking about anti-Semitism, you Jews don't belong here, you're not American, all that kind of stuff. And it was indiscriminately thrown, and they were in nice plastic packages. And by the end of that week, there was this huge rally, relatively speaking huge, a few hundreds of people. And politicians were there, and everybody says no on hate, and it was somewhat powerful, but also predictable. The next week, DeSantis had signed the Don't Say Gay bill. And there was a rally, not a mile away from where that rally was. And there were still a few hundreds of people there, really no politicians, and none of the same people, except for me and one other person, were at both rallies. And that troubled me almost more than anything else. That groups that should be working together to fight hate and prejudice are not on the same page. And you lose when you get divided. And you lose. So what are the root causes that we're not even talking to people? What are the root causes that the NAACP wasn't at those rallies? Why weren't those people at the NAACP rally for Black Lives Matter? Why are people not participating, regardless of what communities they identify with most? And that's something that I found alarming, because we do know that those who are for pushing people back in closets, those who are for redistricting people out of congressional offices, those people who are doing those things to other people are well organized. And we know for a fact, as you said, getting people to vote, getting people to make calls, that takes organization. And how do we motivate? That's a root cause. Lack of motivation. Lack of involvement. That's a root cause. Because if we can't do that, it's going to be very hard to do anything else. Okay.
Hi, I'm Booker. I'm from Chicago Public Schools. I use they, he pronouns. I don't think lack of motivation is a root cause. I think when we're talking about root cause, we're talking about social system. We're talking about systemic oppression. And the answer is end capitalism, unionize? Like, what is the answer? Like, I don't have the answers, but it's not that simple. I just needed to say something there. Would anyone else from around here want to say something here? Oh, there's one over there.
Hi, my name is Ruth. I'm a librarian. I use she, her pronouns. Most of my work has been with 0 to 5-year-olds, and something we know from research is that hatred and bias sets in by the time we are 5 years old. So is K to 12 education a little too late, and do we need to start working earlier than that? How do we reach out to preschoolers and their parents as well?
No? Okay. Anybody else? We have a few more minutes, so you're the youngest person here probably. What do you think?
Well, I've been picked on, so that's rude. My name is Cash. I am an aspiring educator. I'm currently a freshman at the University of Oregon studying to be a teacher. Already, with my perspective as like a young person, I guess, and then also being somebody who is studying to be a teacher, is thinking about where does power lay in schools. And I think that we try to put so much of the power on the teachers, but it's really from the students where it's coming from. And I think that there's so many people I know that are young, that are willing and ready to make these changes and do these changes and participate in these ways, but they're often not given the voice, empowerment, or space to, and it puts a lot more pressure on teachers who are already overburdened in so many different ways. So I'm thinking about if you're working to, changing these systems, students have to play a role and they're ready to play a role. So, thank you.
Sorry you feel picked on. It was meant for the greater good. Anybody else want to say something? Anybody else thinking something? I mean, thoughts are okay. You don't have to have something that's essential. It's ideas and thoughts that are extraordinarily helpful. Okay, so the task force will start shortly after SNEP ends. It will also hopefully be able to contribute to what this symposium will look like in the future. So anyone who wants input on that, and we've gotten some input already, which is extraordinarily helpful. We do not have, at least from what we can see, the best representation of the community at large, and that's something that we need to work on aggressively in order to make sure that every aspect of this community is represented. It's something that we focus on heavily at the museum itself and in the archives, where we have commitments to have parity with all elements of this community represented in our archives and in our library. Whether you're trans, whether you're BIPOC, whatever you are, we're trying to make it so that women in general feel not only welcome, but feel that they're represented in the collections. And SNEP should be no different than that. Everybody should be feeling welcome, and everybody should know that their voice needs to be heard and their story needs to be told. That's something that we're adamant about, and now we will have a long enough period of time to make sure that that can happen a year from now. That the representation is far greater and deeper, so that we do not run into some of the problems that we may have run into this time, and that we have a much bigger range from one side of that rainbow to the other side. So, with that in mind, if you want, you have about 5 minutes. If you want to go and use the QR code, use the bathroom, please do. And when we come back, we're doing the GSAs from Chicago. So everybody, you feel free to move up. We're not a very big group, so the more intimate we are, the closer we are, the more comfortable the speakers are. So please, if you feel comfortable, move up as much as you can. This group is from Chicago. It was not easy for them to get here, as all of you know it wasn't easy for you to get here. So we're thrilled that they are here. They will introduce themselves, and I believe you all represent GSA something? Something. They represent something, and they will tell us exactly what that means. So thank you very much, and you're up and going. Did you give them to us?
Yeah, I did.
So you have your presentation? Yeah. They have your presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, hold them?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll grab it.
So if you want to take your mics
Now.
out and hold them.
Okay.
Okay, cute.
You want your first slide up?
Yeah.
Slide. Oh, there you go. Wait.
Is that?
Oh, that's not the updated version.
Just refresh it, you know. It should be a big now.
refresh it, sorry.
Could you refresh the slide deck? It's been updated a little bit.
It is a Google Docs. It should
Yeah.
be. Yeah, as a Google Doc, it should be on there.
Okay, cool. Let's do it. Let's start. Do you want to start off? No, I can do that. Yeah, we could. Wait, what do you want? You want to start?
What do you mean you can? Just the introduction. All right, well, while we get the slide deck ready, we're just going to go ahead and introduce ourselves. It's so lovely to be here with all of you. My name is Jose, my pronouns are they, he, il, and I'm the LGBTQ plus project support intern for the Chicago Public School. And a fun fact, well, I must just share, I'm a Gemini, because, you know.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Morning. Thank you all for having us. I'm Dee. I use he, they pronouns, and I'm the LGBTQ support specialist at CPS, and I'm a Leo.
Good morning, Good morning, everyone. My name is Megan Tomaszewicz. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a school social worker in CPS and work at Rogers Elementary School. It's pre-K through 8.
Hi, I'm Corey Blake. I use she, they pronouns. I am a high school music teacher at Foreman High School in Chicago.
Hi,
Libra.
everybody. No, it's okay. I'm Sydney G. I use they, them, and she, her pronouns, and I'm the mental health specialist for the Office of Student Health and Wellness at Chicago Public Schools.
Hi, my name is Jerry Zamora. Jerry like Tom and Jerry, it's spelled G-E-R-I though. I am a U.S. history teacher at George Washington High School in Chicago Public Schools. I'm also a GSA advisor, and I get the privilege to be on the GSA Leadership Committee with these lovely people. And I'm a Sagittarius.
I have to say I'm a Sagittarius too. This is important.
All right, before we begin, we would just like to acknowledge the land on which this cathedral was built. Broward County was taken care of by the Taino, Tequesta, Miccosukee, and Seminole tribes long before this land was stolen. The Seminole people refer to themselves as the unconquered people, as they endured 3 wars while maintaining their independence. We acknowledge that ethnic cleansing and genocide plagued the indigenous peoples of what is now Fort Lauderdale, and we know and condemn this.
Thank you, Megan. So with that, I just want to once again thank you for all of you for having us, and also I have the honor of managing the team of folks who are here. We are pretty deep, so if the folks from Chicago could raise your hands or wave just so you can know who we are. Yes, we are deep presenting this work. So essentially, we are all part of a GSA leadership committee. As we wait for the slides, and this committee is 18 people. Mostly GSA advisors who are from different schools throughout the district who support the entire district with LGBTQ plus supportive initiatives. And so we'll get into some of that work and what that looks like shortly.
And I guess just to share some experiences or some quotes from our GSALC members, they've said, I'm really happy that I get to be in a space where I get to work with other really great people to continue a legacy of protecting students. Another GSALC member said, it has been so incredibly warm and welcoming and loving and just affirming. And another member has said, this is like, it feels like a family, a chosen family, having that sort of bond and mission to really help our students, trying to create a supportive, inclusive, safe space for them. This is some of the, I guess, experiences that GSALC members have made throughout the 3 years that Dee has been able to organize this.
So just continuing once again, so we mentioned this leadership committee. Essentially, our role is to make sure that the entire school district can serve as a model that affirms and supports all LGBTQ plus students and staff. And we are a group of folks who are hoping to make this work more possible. So one note is that CPS is unique in the sense that our CEO signed off on guidance that says that all schools should have GSAs within the next 5 years. That was 4 years ago. I'm happy to say that we have nearly 300 GSAs in CPS, and we have about 620 schools. So we're nearing that halfway mark for making sure that we have GSAs in all schools. And this team is really making that possible. So I want to say thank you to them and also for that support and love. And this is a very time-consuming and also beautiful space in which we really ask these folks to commit a lot of labor, time, and energy to making this work possible. And with that in mind, we want to talk about the ways in which we've been able to sustain this space. Let me see. It may be helpful to have the slides up.
Oh, there we go. Yes! Can we go to the next slide? Next slide. Oh, yep, next slide. Next slide. Next slide. That's the quotes. Next slide.
That's the quotes. That's us. That's us.
Next slide.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So just to give some context on what GSA leadership is, as well as how we sustain this space, is that one, it's been our experience that our GSA advisors first do feel isolated at their schools, one, because of the treatment they experience for being LGBTQ+, and also as these folks are doing more work to make the space accessible and affirming for queer folks, that makes them more isolated because the administration sees them as someone who wants to make these radical, bad, or essentially cause trouble. But I think this is very necessary and good trouble that's happening in our schools. And I think that as we have this leadership team, we first wanted to have a space in which GSA advisors felt held, so like a GSA for GSA advisors, where we first very much focus on community building, getting to know each other, and holding each other in that way, because when we do that, one, we have that community, and two, the work is stronger because the work is based in community and not the more capitalist, aggressive, violent systems that we're used to. So the first part of GSALC is to really intentionally build together, get to know each other, and grow together. And two, as importantly, pay. Any and all labor should be compensated. And this is not a This is a very time-demanding group where we meet for at least 5 hours a month, weekly, talking about the work we do and the projects, which the lovely rest panelists will get into in a bit. But all labor should be compensated, and we know that LGBTQ folks are less, get paid less than heterosexual peers, and we don't want to reinforce those same inequities in this group. So before we got far in the work, we were very much exploring ways that we can compensate folks for their time and labor. And also, just for some context on CPS, is that we have a central office that is supposed to support all schools. But the sense that I'm reading from our career staff is that central office isn't really doing that, right? Central office feels very much decentralized, where it's more of a dictator approach rather than like a community building approach. And so my background in community organizing, I was like, in order for us to really do this work with queer folks in mind, we have to be able to talk to folks who are experiencing these policies, this guidance, and these requirements in the school on a daily basis. So most of the team is school-based staff who are in schools every day, and we can serve as a liaison between the schools and our central office as a way to really uplift the folks in that space. And now to get into the work, I'll pass it over to Jerry.
All right, if we could have the next slide, please. So the work, the policy initiatives that we have. And again, my name is Jerry, my pronouns are he, him. Next slide, please. So there's me chaperoning for prom. It was a good outfit. My co-chair is unfortunately not here with us today, Sam Patel, shout out to Sam. Some of the other members in our community building subcommittee, other than myself and Sam, are Emily Clark, which is actually right over there, say hi Em, hey. We have Bree Saab checking in from Chicago at home. Lorraine, say hey, Lorraine Playtech, teaching the children math. I could never. Megan as well, who you all have already met. And then lastly, Mitchell, which is also in the crowd. Hey, Mitch. Hey. So yes, that is our team. Next slide, please. And all of us, as you see, are school-based staff who, our main job is to be, in our schools. But because we are passionate about this work, we make the time to do this work outside of school, right? So our meetings are typically evenings like 5 to 6:30. In case you guys are wondering about where this kind of work fits. So the GSALC Community Building Subcommittee was a subcommittee we started this year. This was our launch year. The committee plans, executes, and evaluates events in Chicago Public Schools for LGBTQ+ students and staff. The subcommittee increases opportunities for GSA advisors as well as GSA participants to be in community with each other, collaborate with each other, and increase GSA support. This subcommittee, has had several projects within just this last inaugural pilot year. Some projects, have included but are not limited to monthly office hours for GSA advisors struggling or just needing advice or support for starting their GSA in their schools. Planning quarterly in-person GSA advisor meetups where other GSA advisors can collaborate, connect with peers. It's also been a great opportunity for GSA advisors to connect regionally. So as you guys know, Chicago, we're the third largest school district. And so that's something that having these kinds of social spaces where you can connect with other people doing the same work, especially when it can feel so isolating, has really been a lifeline. We also, one of my favorite things that we get to do is plan events and field trips, So really centering and getting to dream about what kinds of things we want to see in our schools and in our communities. And supporting people with district level LGBTQ+ support professional developments, including panels where CPS staff can get to meet folks like us who are doing this work in our district, and offering people one-on-one GSA support. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go through some pictures from our events this year. Not all events are pictured. These are just some of our feature ones. This one was an event that we got to do home in Chicago. We have a center known as the Center on Halsted. Is anyone here familiar with the Center on Halsted? A couple people. Even if you're not in Chicago, it's a great site. They have a lot of resources on their website. But the Center on Halsted, right, is, a queer space, right? You don't have to buy anything to hang out there. It's a third space for queer people. They host a whole bunch of different kinds of support groups, support events, and have also hosted our events. And so here we have a GSA mixer GSA advisor mixer that we had. So the people that you see in the crowd, there are other people doing this work in Chicago Public Schools. And so it was a great opportunity for us to network, connect, and really put words right to what we're trying to achieve right in Chicago. Next slide, please. So that was our GSA advisor mixer. Sorry, again, there's adults. Here we have been really lucky to build a partnership with the Chicago Bulls. So if you like basketball, I think you might know the Bulls. There is their little little pride logo that they have for us, and the Bulls have been really instrumental to having these kinds of free, fun spaces where the kids and myself, right, and other GSA advisors have gotten to go to different Bulls events for their Pride nights, be with other GSAs. Here we have two of my students actually, not to brag, who were chosen to be panelists on a panel talking about LGBTQ issues as a high schooler. So you have here two of my students, Damien right there in the middle uses they, them pronouns. They are a junior. And then Dakota right to the right, also a junior, uses he, they pronouns. And they got to talk to all these 8th graders, 7th graders, 6th graders about what it's like to be trans and visibly queer in a high school setting. The events like that put me to tears because I cannot imagine what it would have been like to have had something like that when I was their age. So it was really beautiful to get to see them give really sage advice to these young people. Next slide, please. But the other events we have done, so that was for a GSA elementary school panel. Here we have the high school CPS Bulls Pride Night. So we had several schools, right, attending the Bulls Pride Game Night. As you can see, my kids are decked out with swag. Each of them has their own Bulls limited edition, artist edition hats. So the Bulls really treated them right. Next slide, please. They also got amazing catered meals from the Bulls. And so they felt like superstars. I felt like a superstar. And so these kinds of community partnerships, right, where kids are seeing like a sports team like the Bulls saying, not only do we validate your existence, but we want to uplift you and make you feel connected and supported within your community here in Chicago, has really been life-changing. And I think I'm really excited to see what other kinds of events we can build with other groups as well. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to continue talking for a minute to share a little bit more about the Galaxy Summit. And I'll also hand over some of it to Corey as well. Okay, so next slide. So what is the Galaxy Summit? Well, similar to initiatives in the community building subcommittee that we have, again, the community building subcommittee was first, for this year. The GSA Summit has been around, right, for the last 2 years. This is the 3rd year. I had the honor of being the co-chair on the GSALC subcommittee for the Galaxy Summit last year. So I'll speak a little bit about that experience now. So subcommittee members this year, just kidding. Actually, we can skip that. We could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the CPS Summit, right? So the GSA Summit subcommittee, right, plans, executes the district's GSA Summit, where we try to get as many GSAs in our district, both elementary and high school, to come together for a day of action, community, collaboration, and solidarity. So this year will be our district's 3rd annual GSA Summit. This committee works with GSAs to ensure that student voice is prioritized in the planning process. The 2023 GSA Summit will be the first in-person summit. We're super excited for it. Some responsibilities include, but are not limited to, right, we have planned and executed the GSA Summit, developed marketing materials, and choosing keynote speakers, which again, how do we find those keynote speakers? They come directly from the Google Forms that we sent out to the schools to try to determine who best to speak on their behalf. All right, next slide, please. Here is our promotional flyer, if you're wondering what kinds of things that we're making. Now you might be wondering, why Galaxy Summit, right? It was really important for us to make sure that the students of Chicago, that not only the out students were able to attend an event like this, but that it could be something that all students could attend, right, to celebrate a constellation of diversity, if you will. And so what kinds of things are we going to have at the summit? Well, we're going to have art, we're going to have speakers, performances, workshops. Next slide, please. A lot of these workshops are going to be facilitated by students and by staff. Here is a model of our schedule. I know it's a little hard to see from up there. But we have things like light breakfasts being served, opening ceremonies, several student session tracks. Thank you. We have several student session tracks, and again, these sessions come from what students want to see at the summit. We have different breakout rooms, lunches, food and stuff are being provided, again, through partnerships with people like the Center on Halsted. Performances, closing ceremonies, community art building, and we're hoping to have a little mini ball this year at the end of the summit. Oh, John, pass it on. Yeah. Yeah.
I want to acknowledge a couple of my Yeah, that's totally fine. One thing, Amanov was left off of the names list for those on the social committee. Yes. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that. Also, I wanted to point out that one of the reasons that we chose, or that the name Galaxy was chosen, the Galaxy Summit, this was a student-generated response. A lot of our students do not come from safe and supportive homes, and so this is a way for them to still be involved and a part of this queer community of their peers, of their age groups, without necessarily having to be outed in their home environments. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that, if you want to.
Oh, no, that's good.
Let me figure out where we are. Oh, yeah. And so, and also in this summit, we're, again, you mentioned that this is the first year that it's in person. We also have all of the official, gear, like the shirts and swag bags and stuff like that. All of the art and designs for those are also student generated. And so those were submitted by students from across CPS. That were then voted on, and so there's a lot of student voice that has been intentionally embedded into this summit, and so I think that's really, really important to acknowledge. Cool, and so we're gonna shift now to, if we could go to the next slide, to talk about the research on bathrooms that the bathroom subcommittee did last year. Megan, do you want to introduce this?
Yeah, can we go to the next slide first? Okay, that's us. So we also have some other folks in the audience who were part of this, including Mitchell again and Lorraine. If you can go to the next slide. Okay, so this project, first in other spaces. So this was born out of these signs that just popped up out of nowhere last year really quickly that say Girls Plus and Boys Plus, that were just sent to every school without really a plan of how to roll them out, of how to support students. It caused a lot of controversy, and there weren't queer voices being used to support the signage. Student voices, teacher voices, we have a lot of queer and trans teachers that are out in CPS that would have had excellent input on these signs. So students were not happy with this, administrators weren't happy with this, no one really knew what to do with these signs. And so in response to that, we created this subcommittee in October of 2021-ish. Yeah, okay. October-ish. So if we can go to the next slide. So what we did is we sent out, first we wanted to do both a quantitative and qualitative study. And so I was more on the quantitative subcommittee, and then Corey was more qualitative. So I'm just going to talk about what that quantitative survey looked like. We sent it out to GSA advisors and actually offered a stipend, once again, offering money to give these responses. And not a stipend to the teacher, but to the GSA. I think it was it $200? So a good amount of money was able to go to the schools to support the GSAs if they participated in this and gave their input, which I love that we're able to allot money for that purpose. So we ended up getting 230 responses from students about bathroom safety, accessibility, and safety, accessibility, and signage. Yeah, okay. And really, we were most interested in what these signs could look like, but we found it to be a good opportunity to look for other information about safety and accessibility. So let's see. Do you want to talk about the qualitative study?
Yeah, so on the qualitative side of it, we partnered with UIC, and we went and we did a lot of planning on what questions we were going to ask the GSAs, how we could get the best data as we're talking to them to really dig into their experiences and around bathroom usage in the schools. And we gathered a lot of data. About 36 different focus groups were done across the district, which is around 300 students. All grade levels, or all elementary, middle, and high schools were represented in these studies. And so we got to have a lot of feedback from, our kids about what are the challenges that they face on a daily basis just to use the restroom. And so if we want to go to the next slide.
So I'm going to share some of the quantitative information that we were able to gather. First, 43.1%, keeping in mind these are GSA students, okay, this is not a sample size of all students, these are students who go to the GSA. 43.1% of students reported identifying as non-binary, transgender, gender non-conforming in CPS. 12.9% answered I don't know to this question about gender identity. 36.6% of respondents answered cisgender. How many one-person open to all gender bathrooms does your school have? So we asked our students this because in Chicago Public Schools, students have access to the bathroom that affirms their gender identity, and also should have access to a single stall bathroom if they're available, if that's something they desire. Now, if somebody else doesn't feel comfortable around a trans student in CPS going into a multi-stall bathroom, that student can then use the single stall bathroom. We're not going to take the trans student out of the multi-stall bathroom if they feel comfortable there. So 26.7% of students responded that they don't know or that their school does not have one at all. And Sydney took this and looked at what this would mean for CPS as a whole, and that would be about 60,000 students. So just, that's not a perfect stat because we don't really know what the rest of the students would say, but we have such a large district, and that's a huge percentage of students. Next slide, please. I can't get to the next slide on my, thank you. Oh, no, I think I've got it. Okay, so this just shows that 60.4% of total students reported that they are not easily accessible. So really we're just looking at this as like a pie chart. Some students said does not apply, but gosh, 60% being saying that it's not accessible. It's a lot to kind of think about. Sydney, did you have more on the slide that you wanted to say? Because I know you made it.
Yeah, one of the other things that we gathered was, it's not shown on the slide, but about 17.2% of the student respondents did report feeling unsafe using school bathrooms, just like at all. So yeah, that's a lot of students who are just not able to access bathrooms that align with their gender identity, or just don't feel safe doing it, are being called out by other students or staff, being harassed. So it's just mind-boggling to think about how many students just go through this on a daily basis for the simple act of just using the bathroom.
Next slide, please.
Yeah, so on the qualitative side of the data, some common trends were bullying, harassment, and general discomfort. And so when we're talking about bullying, there were instances of threats, physical fights, offensive comments, slurs, homophobia, transphobia, questioning, misgendering, along those lines, from both students and staff. One student quote, "I don't think anybody feels safe. I've been harassed for being LGBTQ and made fun of, and I've seen people get made fun of." Assuming gender identity, kicking students out of bathrooms that don't align with their perception of the student. So for example, a student needs to use an affirming restroom, and the security guard is, "Why are you going into that restroom? You need to go to the other restroom," in instances like that of policing genders. Another student quote, "I used the girls' restroom to see how it felt, and the security guard yelled at me like, 'What are you doing here? Why are you using this? You don't look like you're trans,' and I had to like defend myself to be able to use the bathroom." In regards to discomfort, there's general feelings of awkwardness and discomfort with having to use the bathroom as transgender non-conforming students. They feel that they are judged by other students when using the bathrooms. They're feeling forced to choose the bathroom that aligns with the sex assigned at birth, and having to choose a bathroom can potentially out them. There's a lot of fear when having to use the bathrooms. One student said, "I've only used the gender-neutral bathroom because I'm afraid of students knowing that I'm trans, since I feel like I'm not really allowed in any bathroom. I'm ashamed to go into the girls' bathroom because I'm not female and I'm too masculine anyway. I'm ashamed to go in the men's bathroom because I look too feminine. I've never asked to use any binary bathroom because I'm scared of being bullied or denied access to the bathrooms, which is why I try to secretly go to the genderless or family bathrooms." Next slide, please. Other common trends include avoidance, and so feeling forced to choose a bathroom, but also fearing judgment, not wanting to out themselves by asking for a key from the staff. Many of our gender-neutral bathrooms are kept under lock and key, and a lot of this has to do with, I know in my school, they've locked the gender-neutral bathroom because of students going in there and vandalizing it, or doing other illicit activities in the bathroom, and so they've had to kind of monitor that a little closely. But then again, that puts our TG&C students at higher risk because of that, right? For students that are holding in their bodily functions, these actions can have serious health risks such as UTIs or issues with their kidneys. There are students who will go an entire day without using the restroom because they're too unsafe or uncomfortable to use, or don't have access to a restroom that's affirming for them. Another thing is the lack of privacy. Students talked about lack of privacy, meaning like the gaps are way too big, and the stalls, things like that. Just other students' lack of boundaries when it comes to using the restroom, things especially in elementary schools where people are like popping their heads under the stalls and stuff like that. Accessibility, so like having to go long distances just to get to a restroom that's accessible for them. The signs that we mentioned when we first started talking about, the paper signs that were rolled out, they're extremely difficult to read from far away, the students mentioned, and they're not indicative of accessibility, AED, Braille, and in many cases there are students, because they were paper and because they were sent as like printouts to just stick on the doors, there were students who just took them down and principals who didn't care enough to replace them. And so for many schools, these bathroom signs, the boys plus, girls plus, were up there for like maybe a couple of days and then they never appeared again. The principals did what they were supposed to and then that was it, and there was no follow-up. Next slide, please. We talked a lot about signage. We went through with all of the students many different examples of how bathroom signages looked in various settings. The majority of students indicated that they preferred bathroom signs that were simply labeled as bathroom, or restroom, all gender or gender neutral bathroom. Some students don't feel safe going to the gender neutral bathrooms because some kids in the older grades make fun of the kids that use that bathroom. Quote, some of the kids say, ooh, it's gender neutral, and say slurs and homophobic things, end quote. Quote, I like when it just says restroom, then it's just like a normal bathroom and doesn't confine people to labels, end quote. Quote, I feel more comfortable going to a gender-neutral bathroom than the women's bathroom because it fits me like my identity better, end quote. Next sign. So here's some examples of some of the most preferred restroom signage. We looked at all kinds of signage, including ones that had, like unicorns and stuff like that. And while some of the students thought it was cute, ultimately the discussion came around of, we're not mythical creatures, and we just need to use the restroom. So tell me what's in the restroom, and we're good. Next slide, please. Some other considerations around bathroom signage. Gendered language on signs as well as being used by staff. So getting rid of gendered language altogether. So saying girls line up for the bathroom or questioning based on their appearance or why they're going into certain bathrooms. There needs to be a big push for menstrual products, which we address. Staff misgendering people or outing them, not allowing them to access single-stall bathrooms, etc., and or not enough intervention when students are being harassed and bullied. Students not respecting the paper signs, throwing away, no announcement or information from the schools about them, speaking to the need for an intentional rollout and permanent signage. So that was one of the things, is having not just sticking a paper sign on the door, but actually having permanent signage that can't just be taken down. And many students reported that they hate urinals. A lot of times they're dirty, there's a lack of privacy or no partitions between them. They just want stalls. And so, next slide, please, and I'll pass it over to Sydney.
Actually, Sydney, before you go, can I interject? So just like a bit of qualitative, many of us up here had our GSAs be involved in this qualitative study, and I had my 5th and 6th graders and then my 7th and 8th grade group, and Sydney was the facilitator for both. And just the opportunity for our students to be part of this, not only is it really great for policy, but I've never seen my students be so professional, so articulate, so thoughtful, so engaged. It was such a powerful individual experience for my students as well. And so just kind of thinking of both ends of kind of how this impacts, this project impacts individuals.
Thank you for that. Sorry. Sorry. Okay. So the next slide is Chicago-specific, like Illinois-specific data, but I'm going to go into a little bit of how you can think about it if you are from a different state who has different laws, and what this can kind of look like. So within the state of Illinois and Chicago specifically, we know that gender-neutral multi-stall bathrooms are legally permissible. A lot of places in our like queer neighborhoods already have this implemented, and it's been totally functional, it's been great. We also know that gender-neutral multi-stall bathrooms do need to fit certain physical standards, so that is something that is written into the plumbing code. We got really into the weeds with this. We had a lot of discussions about plumbing code, and so some of the considerations that the students were complaining about as like lack of privacy, gaps in the stalls, those are all supposed to be not a thing for gender-neutral multi-stall restrooms. They're supposed to be much more private, which is a good thing to know. And then we also know that CPS as a district, we are limited in our ability to update all of the necessary multi-stall bathrooms and on any given timeline, just for sheer lack of funding. It does involve renovations having to be made to a lot of these restrooms. So when we were able to get all of this data and compile it together from the focus groups and from the survey, we put together a quick little slide deck, very similar to this one, where we were able to set up a meeting with our facilities department and the Office of Student Protections in Title IX, and then also we were able to meet with the City of Chicago Department of Buildings in order to see what legally or what permission-wise we needed to do in order to actually make these gender-neutral restrooms available and accessible for our students. We've had many conversations about what the rollout would look like. One of the things that we've been talking about is just the specific cost numbers in order to comply with the plumbing code. And so we're putting together specific numbers. It's about $1 million to renovate the bathrooms in order to make sure they're totally up to the standard, which is a lot considering we have over 600 schools. And so we're envisioning this rollout to be over a long period of time, but they are already building new buildings that have bathrooms to these specifications in order to make them more accessible. So all of the new construction at CPS is being done intentionally to make them able to be gender-neutral multi-stall restrooms. So moving forward, we're also talking about changing the temporary signage, the paper signs that we have, because one of my favorite quotes from one of the focus groups that I helped facilitate was that for the Girls Plus and Boys Plus signage, they were like, it feels like a subscription service, like, what does that mean? And I was just like, yeah, that's a really great point. It's just like girls and something. And so we're truly trying to be intentional about taking that student feedback and incorporating it into the signage to make them align best with what students are actually asking for. So keeping that gender neutral, and also we're having conversations about what it would look like to, or how much to just make the more solid plaques instead of paper signage, how we could roll that out, and then maybe backtrack and do those renovations after the fact, just to make sure that we're able to give students as quickly as we can. And so we're envisioning a soft launch sometime next year of new signage that is not Girls Plus, Boys Plus, but actually truly gender neutral, just has the images of what facilities are actually in the room. Some of the schools are already doing this work upon popular request. Some of the local school councils or the students have gotten together to advocate to just changing the signage. Like my colleagues mentioned earlier, the rollout originally was not supported by the technical assistance that is necessary in order to just improve that gender literacy in school buildings, both for school staff and for the students, just saying, this is why we're doing this. Just having that conversation, giving students the ability to actually internalize, oh, this isn't just something the district is doing to check off a box, right? It's something that we are intentionally doing to respond to the needs that we're hearing from our students. And as we get more and more data from our student populations, we're lucky enough to be able to administer the Youth Risk Behavior Survey every other year. And it just goes to show that our numbers of students who identify as transgender nonconforming are steadily increasing. Our students who identify as within the LGBTQ plus spectrum are steadily increasing, and in the meantime, those mental health rates are what they are. They have only gotten worse, for lack of a better way. And so, this very simple thing that we can do, that the district, that we can help fund that, we can help just provide that space, just having one bathroom in the school or 2 bathrooms in the schools that, students that truly feel comfortable in, I think is something that we're trying to do much more intentionally, and encouraging our school staff to build up their literacy so that they're not saying, okay, girls in one line, boys in one line, or saying, boys aren't allowed in the girls plus room. And it's like, I don't know how that works out. But yeah, so that's thinking about how that can be applied to your specific school or your specific district. I don't recommend getting super into the plumbing code because it is often very technical language and not super easy to follow along with, but engaging with your facilities or building management just to see, you know, what the laws or what the actual policy is as written, because some of the things that we were running into were the sort of, I think it's called restroom or equal access project, yeah. But so if there is a women's room, there has to be a men's room, and so just to, you know, if we're gendering them at all. And so knowing that, okay, if we're wanting to change one bathroom in a school building, we would also have to change another one in order to make sure there's equal numbers there. You know, really taking a look, you can schedule a meeting with your city or your town Department of Buildings. Thankfully, the person that we met with was really receptive to it and also very aware that this was an ongoing problem that a lot of spaces in Chicago were already dealing with and figuring out how to roll out. And so really engaging with your local representatives there as well. And then the funding piece, thankfully we were able to use some of our funding for the stipends for the GSAs that participated in our data gathering. That came from a CDC Dash grant, 1807, and we used part of the mental health supplement of that grant actually in order to be able to do that. Because at the root here, you know, we're talking about bathrooms, but we're not talking about bathrooms. You know, we're talking about students' experience. We're talking about how safe they feel in schools and their mental health outcomes. And I think just seeing an intentional use of space that is exclusively, you know, for folks who don't fall under that stereotypical, you know, cis man, cis woman category, you know, just seeing that be existing at all in the school building can really do a big culture shift there. So. Yeah, that's what I have to say about that. I don't know what the next slide is, but I think that's the end of it. If you want to go to the next slide, I think it is. Oh yeah, you can skip this one. Yes, so thank you all for listening to us. We're happy to take questions, I think, if we have some time.
Yeah. How much time do we, if any, do we have? Okay, great. Before we... Before we open up the questions, I do want to quickly send some special thank yous to the folks who make this work possible. Starting off with my boss, Booker, who has really spearheaded this work. Who has been spearheading this work at CPS for almost 7 years and has really been a leader and held us all through this process. So thank you, Booker, for your leadership. Also to the CDC for that money and that support too, because it is expensive, and also don't know if my role exists if it weren't for the CDC's very intentionally centering of LGBTQ+ folks in that grant, and as well to my intern, lovely Jose, who has been incredible and just one of the most incredible and passionate folks I've worked with, who will soon be leaving our team, unfortunately, but still at CPS, working in the Office of Student Protections, and still will be working to uplift LGBTQ+ students. So thank you, Jose, for your work. And also to Sydney, who also will be transitioning out, but has been incredible and over the years that they've been here. And this work, particularly our bathroom equity project was spearheaded by Sydney and has just brought so much dedication and love to our space. And we will miss you and grateful for all the impact that you've had on CPS. And to our team, all of GSALC, we are very deep here, maybe a 1-to-1 ratio of GSALC folks to everyone else. So please do talk to them. They are incredible school-based staff who have been dedicating a lot of energy, time, and love to this work, and we'd love to get to connect with y'all too. And lastly, to our queer ancestors, queer alumni who are no longer with CPS due to push out or just not being able to deal with the bureaucracy or more reasons, who have put so much love and help us get to where we are today. So thank you to all of you all as well for listening, for being receptive, and just holding us in this project. And with that, we'll open it up to questions, if anyone has any. Oh, I see some hands over here. How should we?
I can be the runner.
Quickly before we do that, we also want to say thank you to Dee, because Dee is really the backbone of the work and everything we do. They are CPS alumni, so it's so incredible to see them back in the office doing this queer work for the students and just envisioning a different future for our students. So they are really the backbone, and thank you. I know from GSALC and from all of us, because you're doing incredible work to change the lives of so many queer students and just students overall in Chicago Public Schools. Who has questions?
Hi, Bill, he, him pronouns. I live in Chicago, but teach in Evanston, actually. So we also have just recently, we transitioned to gendered restrooms into all gender spaces. But we never really had, it was kind of interesting, we never had that follow-up to have the training or conversation with staff and or students to explain. We've had the single-use all gender restrooms for a long time. But now the all gender spaces have really, all the restrooms in a high school, for those of us that work in a high school, are just vaping centers or places where students are kind of getting into nefarious things. But I was wondering if you had any resources in terms of the training that you've done or the conversations, or how you've started to have those conversations in a school-wide level to communicate that.
Yeah, so I'll start, Sydney, if you want to take it afterwards. So CPS is also a bit unique in the sense that we do have a required staff webinar that all 40,000 plus staff are required to take twice a school year, made possible by Booker once again. And so we very much incorporate the requirements of that guidance in that webinar that we expect staff to take. Some staff definitely turn the volume down and do all this other stuff during it, but we like to think that folks can use that bathroom guidance module as a place to start in terms of coming back to it if they have questions or curiosities about how the rollout is happening. But we do also work very closely with our GSAs at CPS, so I'll let Sydney, if you want to touch that.
Sure. Yeah, so I think one of the things that we intentionally did, our lovely Jose put together a one-pager that was talking about accessible facilities, and also a lot of students really were liking the idea of having student leadership groups like GSAs going classroom to classroom at their schools and saying, this is why we're doing this is why it's important. So there is a peer-to-peer education aspect, and also it enables students to verbalize that in front of their teachers as well, so that we're recognizing that this is a priority, and it's as important for the teachers to be educating themselves on these issues. So that was another idea that we were tossing around of engaging GSAs and our student leaders.
From the school perspective of how this is really getting rolled out, I just want to mention, I think that a lot of queer and trans staff end up doing a lot of this education in their schools, talking to their principals or vice principals. I know that was my experience. As soon as they got the girls plus boys plus, I got called to the office to explain to them what to do. So I think, and I'm happy to do it, but I think that that's just the reality right now too, is that, people get the one pager, they get the information, but they're still but what actually am I supposed to do? And I know that's not just my experience. I know a lot of queer and trans staff in CPS are carrying that labor. So.
Booker, I naively asked you yesterday how long we could possibly talk about potties and how interesting it could be. I have my answer now. It's very, very important. I'm one of the schools where we received those pieces of paper, and it was a call to, if you are not on board, get on board. And so that's a beautiful thing, but I didn't realize how much more work went into it and how deeply thoughtful. Bravo, truly amazing work. Thank you.
Yes, Mitchell.
Hi, I really appreciate how you gathered the student voice, but then you put it into action, because we get districts who do that, and the students say, okay, you've asked us this survey 3 years now, and what has come of it? But I just had really two clarifying questions when you said the district required that GSAs be in all schools. Did that include elementaries? And my second question was, when you said you partnered with USC, is that a local acronym or is that like University of Southern California or?
Yeah, so for UIC, it's University of Illinois, Chicago. Yeah, and so they're a research team, and they worked with us a lot on the qualitative data aspect of it. As for the other part of the question, does somebody else?
Yes, it does include elementary schools. Most of our GSAs are elementary schools at CPS too.
We also, the vast majority of our elementary schools are pre-K-8. So it's not, you know, I feel like many other places like pre-K-5, so that also makes a difference. When we think about elementary, we're also thinking about 13, 14-year-olds as well. They're very rare.
So I love how y'all put in surveys or asked questions from the youth to hear their voices in that, and I was curious if you could explain exactly how you ascertained those voices. Was it through a survey? Was it an in-person conversation at a GSA meeting? Could you all speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so it was two-part. We did both of those things. And so Megan, they managed the survey aspect of it. So of our subcommittee, we were divided into two teams. One team was strictly focused on the quantitative data, creating surveys that would best get us the answers that we were looking for. And then the other team was the qualitative, and we developed an entire process for how to facilitate these interviews with GSAs. They were all done virtually, and so the teacher would log in and we would be on one end and we would see the entire GSA on the screen. But it was essentially, it was always two of us from our subcommittee interviewing a group of GSA students. And so it wasn't the same people doing every interview every time. We switched it up, you know, based on our own availability, of course, because there's a lot of schools in CPS. But yeah, so those were the two elements. Was there more you wanted from that? Yeah.
I may be able to speak out. Oh, sorry. So I was curious too, you did use a survey. Did you all receive, or have you been receiving any pushback from parents about surveys in general, and how did you navigate that process? And additionally, how did you obtain parental consent for the survey if that is a requirement in Chicago?
So we worked with the research team at the local university in order to make sure that the wording of each of the questions in the survey and in the focus group were purely, you know, open-ended, data-focused, not trying to elicit any specific response in order to do so. And, you know, because for the focus groups, we're meeting with the GSAs, and in some of the cases, right, the students have at least parental notification that they are part of a club that meets, you know, during school or after school. And so in that aspect, we did not need to get an additional sort of permission slip in order to conduct this survey. We did have a conversation with our law department at the district in order to make sure, because one of the stipulations is talking about mental health, talking about sexual health. A lot of those questions were legally not necessarily eliciting stories or trauma sharing, you know, that kind of thing, in order to avoid triggering others. But we really tried to, you know, lay out our community agreements before engaging in the conversation to say, let's not overshare our personal details, but let's see, based on your experience, based on the experience of your friends, or you know, the other queer folks that you interact with at the school, how on average do you think accessible this is? You know, so speaking more towards the you know, practical concerns about it, rather than eliciting, you know, why do you hate this, or, you know, that kind of thing, in order to avoid that oversharing and potentially leading to some problems later on. So.
I don't know if this, I feel like it relates, but in CBS, the students don't need parental consent to attend a GSA that's during the school day. So the majority of my students' parents don't know that they attend. Some do, and some, I'll get an email from a parent about GSA, like, oh yeah, my dad, whatever. But mostly they don't. But if they're after school, like I have an after school one and a during the school one, my after school one, the parents do know, but we can get creative about what it's called. So I know that happens a lot. Yeah, so as far as that goes, I didn't receive any pushback from parents, and that's maybe because they didn't even know about it. So.
I just want to add one point. So the UIC team is funded as our evaluator on our DASH grant. So this was not research. This was an evaluation. That is why we didn't have to go through more formal mechanisms, because it's like internal.
I quickly want to know, to add to the last thingy, this was all like student interest. So before we even went into GSAs virtually, or before we even gave out the survey, we checked in with GSA advisors to make sure that there was student interest to being able to participate in this. So all the students that we were able to talk to and engage with, or the GSA clubs, were students who are already having these conversations in their GSAs or in the school, and this was just another opportunity for them, for us to gauge that data. So this was all student interest, and if we acknowledge that there was GSAs who were not, could not participate for multiple reasons, so we didn't, I guess, we included them, and we sent the email, but if they couldn't, right? So that was another thing where students, this was all student interest as well.
Hi, I'm Sav Bear. I use they, she pronouns. I don't work for Seattle Public Schools, but conducted research for them at one point, and we just kind of tacked on to the spring climate survey questions about students' identity, and in that survey they found that 30% of students K through 12 identify as queer within their sexual orientation, and grades 3 through 12, 40% identify as queer within their gender, which is huge, right? And so I was wondering, that was an institutionalized based research that they were doing. It sounds like y'all are doing it a little different, but do you have a point of contact for doing a whole school district study for all of the students?
Yeah, we have something very similar. We have our youth risk behavior survey that we have, and so we have very similar stats too. We just got 2022 data that 1 in 3 middle school students identifies as LGBTQ+ as well. I'm not sure what the point of contact is for that, but maybe Booker can mention that. Booker.
Did y'all need to present data to get the gender neutral bathrooms, or were you just able to go for it?
So for the initial rollout, that was a little bit just the paper signs, the girls plus boys plus. There wasn't a lot of work done before that, or follow-up work for that, and that's why we formed this subcommittee. And so, sorry, I'm losing track of what the question was exactly.
I guess I work for a school district right outside of Seattle, and I think they would be a little hesitant to roll it out as a whole district. And so I'm wondering, did it start as a grassroots organization between the queers, or did y'all have a point of contact from the district that was we're gonna do this? Oh.
Okay, the real way that this came about is our Title IX coordinator for the district is interpreting Title IX to include trans people using bathrooms. So actually the girls plus boys plus signs don't actually mean true gender neutral bathrooms. They just mean, it's just putting a name to call out that we have an inclusive policy, that trans students and non-binary students, gender expansive students can use the bathroom that aligns with their identity and or based on their comfort. So unfortunately, the media, don't trust the media. They reported it as gender neutral bathrooms. That's actually not what they are. So what these focus groups showed is that we do need true gender neutral bathrooms. And that's where we're facing the plumbing code barriers that Sydney referenced, and it's still a work in progress. We don't, we have a goal, but we don't have answers. Did that answer your question more?
Thank you. So my name's Cash. I am an aspiring educator at the University of Oregon, so I'm studying to be a teacher. Yay! In the University of Oregon, we have new gender-inclusive bathrooms, new spaces, and I really, really appreciate those. As a queer individual in school, I remember being bullied so often in those spaces, and that being a non-safe space for me. And I just want to say thank you for all the work that you've done, not only with this specific initiative, but also having this GSA Council for Leadership is really, really important for bringing those voices together and making it feel like we're not alone in those like GSA spaces, right? You know, not feeling like it's 12 kids at one school, but feeling like it's this entire community of individuals. That's really important. So I want to say thank you first. I also just kind of wanted to ask, as somebody who's going into teaching, somebody who wants to, you know, take this to whatever district I go to, take these initiatives, do you have any, you know, kind of recommendations for how to make these gender-inclusive bathroom spaces, you know, how to bring those to more spaces, and also how to bring about a GSA Leadership Council to new areas? If you have any recommendations about that, that would be really awesome.
I guess that's me. Oh, geez. Well, really, it's solidarity and coalition building, which I feel like you're already hopefully doing, right? And it's a goal that you might have. Showing up authentically, which I feel like, again, you're doing. But connecting with the people who can make something like this possible, right? That would be, I guess, my biggest advice. Also, there are queer teacher support groups as well. I mean, some people might be involved in those too. I think that's a great resource, especially when finding a job. That would be a recommendation, would be to continue dreaming about something like this, no matter where you go, and to find the people that are going to dream and make it happen with you.
Echoing all of that, but also I would also say look at partner organizations as well. Because a lot of this change comes about through outside of the school system, and putting that pressure on, fortunately, we have people like Booker and Dee who are advocates and help bring us all together in order to make this possible. But always partnering with those outside organizations will only make your work stronger and more productive.
I also agree with everyone. One thing that I lean on really hard in my school for advocacy is my students, because I feel like I can always, if my students say something, if my students say that they need something, I always feel like, wow, I can advocate for my student and it's coming from them, and my principal or my leadership is more likely to listen to that. So I definitely am like, as soon as my students bring it up, I'm like, okay, great, let's talk about this. What do you need? And then I can take that to my principal and it's not me. So maybe one day I'll feel more confident at just being me. But I lean on my students really hard for that. Whatever they need, that's the first project I'm going to take to my leadership.
If I could just add, I think something that we have seen and unfortunately continue to see in especially a district so big as Chicago is, you know, individuals at schools, often like queer individuals, do feel isolated and don't feel necessarily that they have the support from, you know, the institution, right, to support their advocacy for themselves and also for the queer students. And so I think the intention behind building this coalition, this leadership committee of GSA advisors, a lot of folks were already doing this work in the school building, but they were doing it all by themselves, and they were the only voice, right, that was being represented at their schools. You know, and so in building this just group of getting different advisors together, also having our community building subcommittee now, we're really trying to expand out. So even if, you know, the district, whatever district you are going to be at, or, you know, whatever, doesn't have an LGBTQ support team, you know, within central office, you know, at least getting together, right, making a Google Classroom or some kind of Discord, right, or something to get GSA advisors from different schools to be talking to each other, to be sharing resources with each other, and to build that solidarity, that voice behind it, in order to just have the strength in numbers, just say this is not just a me issue, this isn't just me, you know, making a big deal about not feeling comfortable using the bathrooms at my own school, right? But it's across the whole city, and this is a widespread issue. And I think really being able to build that solidarity, there's so much power in that.
Yeah, I want to echo that, Sydney. Thank you all for those sentiments. Because I think that, so I started at CPS about 3.5 years ago, and I heard about the goal to have GSAs in all schools when I was hired, and I was like, okay, cool, Booker, who's doing that work, who's making it happen? And they're like, it's you. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And I feel very fortunate to have been able to make this position what I wanted it to be, in terms of there is, I think, with queer folks and many marginalized people, we know how prevalent these issues are, and it's always instantly, let's get to work. And yes, that work is required, but let's take a moment to center ourselves and breathe, and also just have some fun in the meantime too, because the work is always going to be there for the foreseeable future. And so when I was thinking about establishing this committee with our previous DMP student, a nursing student who did a lit review of similar committees throughout the nation, we were very much thinking about first building community. First of all, let's figure out who's doing the work, what schools are leading this work, and connecting with those folks before we ask people to do more work, because everyone has enough work to do, right? So once we really center getting to know individuals and uplifting them and providing them with support, they're more likely to trust us as central office staff, who have historically and also currently really fail a lot of schools. It was easier for us to connect and build with folks we have built community with already. So first, just like as Cindy mentioned, get to know who's in the district, who has similar intentions, aligning politic, and also build with them. And that momentum can really build and become something similar to this committee or something beyond that, but definitely center the individual before you get to the work. And that's what we've been using for our model for the last 2 years now.
Thank you so much. I also just really, one follow-up is that I really liked how you brought up the importance of funding, right? You were like, hey, money's important, this is labor, this deserves, being paid, right? So if you can outline kind of some of your funding streams, how you access those, how you got in those conversations, so you were able to make this a more viable space for people to join and get paid for those opportunities, able to do the research you're able to do because of that funding. If you could outline where that came from and how.
Okay, right now? Or oh, sorry,
I don't need a spreadsheet, you're good.
Okay, it's essentially, we mostly got these funds from our CDC grant, and so we have, and also CPSS have a requirement that we pay, if we have an overtime program like this one, we pay the union rate, so love unions. And so we use our DASH funding essentially to support the hourly base wages that we pay the team for their work and labor on it too. But there are some partner organizations who will compensate folks for these similar programs. So if you don't have that grant, definitely reaching out to those organizations throughout the place you're at to see if they can provide some supplemental funding too.
I don't know if you mentioned this while I left the room, but have you talked about locker rooms and the restrictions and freedoms that you have?
Yeah, so, wow, I forgot. Yeah, so the same, so everything's student choice. So we tell school, so every school is different, but we tell school-based staff members to really listen to the students and see decide where they want to use the locker room. Sometimes they do want more privacy, so school-based staff have to adjust where the student can change. But it's sometimes I know a lot of our schools don't need to change, especially for locker room, so that already we don't have to worry about. But some schools, it's the student choice where they want to go and change. And if a student needs more privacy, we need to adjust just overall for all students. But we honestly we haven't had that much conversations with that. We know there is a lot of pushback a lot of times, but because most schools don't need to change for gym or PE, we don't hear much about that. I don't know if any of you.
Yeah, so in CPS we have, this is my favorite topic, we have gender support plans that students cannot have. Not all students have these who are trans or gender nonconforming, but I know at my school, like it's something, anytime a student asserts new pronouns, teachers will let the student know that they can have this gender support plan, and that's worked pretty well, where then they talk to me and this one other staff at my school, and we put that together. Locker rooms is listed on there, so we talk to the student, like, what kind of accommodations do you need for your locker room? And they tell us, we don't have locker rooms at our school, so we don't do that. The only time we do that is if it's an 8th grader about to go to high school, so that we can write that down and then communicate that then to the high school if there are locker rooms. It's really, at the individual level, we're able to kind of accommodate that. And even if a student doesn't have a gender support plan, they can still get the accommodation. This is just a way for us to sit down with them and like go make a plan.
I think we are almost at time. Unless there's one more question, we can wrap
Just
up.
one more. Is Yolanda from DASH and the CDC here right now? She was here yesterday. So for those of you who are interested in DASH and the CDC, Yolanda was here. Maybe Leslie Ann can connect us to Yolanda for those of you who want to talk about that.
Thank you.
Well, I'm going to just ask one question and then ask everybody who is doing a program, anyone who is a presenter, to come up here. We're going to do some photos, and then those of you who are not presenting, there will be, have your name tag out, and you can go up there into the entranceway, and there will be lunch. So the only question I have is, the way the media presents Chicago is as a very divided city, so it may be, it may not be. It also presents it as a very violent city, which it may be, it may not be. Does that, the work you're doing, translate to schools no matter where they are in the city? And how is the community accepted or not accepted in different parts of the city based on population, based on economics, et cetera?
So I teach at the farthest southeast you could possibly get in Chicago. My population is 90% Latino. I am a trans masculine Latino teacher, and that's something that I get a lot of questions about. And so I do want to clear, for people who are not from Chicago, our city is not painted in blood. And I'm honestly sick of hearing people call it Chirac. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It just makes me very upset when I hear people paint my city like it's not that. So I just want to preface with that. Secondly, a lot of our initiatives, so like in the community building, a community building program that we have, we focused it on 2 networks within our district that are primarily Black and brown, because these are the schools, especially in the southwest side, south side, southeast side, southwest side, is where students, like schools we need these supports the most because we don't already have these established. GSAs up north in Chicago, so the stereotype is that the north side of Chicago is where, well, because it is also just like where all the gayborhoods are. That's where the most support will be. But at my school, I have had an outpour of support, and I'm not a neighborhood school, not select enrollment, not like it's 9 through 12 kids from the neighborhood, and I've been very lucky and very grateful to interact with folks who are accepting of my existence and of my students' existences. And so I think it just, I'm not, I mean, I wish I could give you like a solution for it, but I think for me, it's just been being an active community member and being that trans person that people know in my community, has helped make sure that those voices are uplifted and elevated. But it definitely, we've been, if anything, have focused more on providing these resources to our Southwest schools. But I do not think it makes it any less valuable or prioritized or important. Like it happens everywhere.
Yeah, and very quickly, thank you, Jerry, to those points. I feel similarly as a Chicago native from the South Side that this idea that is so violent when we live in the United States, which is plagued with white supremacy, and also very harmful forms of like violence itself, right? So when we see kind of like physical violence that is very much a effect of people who don't have resources and don't have access. Like, of course, we are ones is to lash out, but I do want to push back on that and, remind us that we are living in a very violent place, in a place that doesn't only experience violence against people who live here, but also people in other countries around the world. So just to expand our knowledge of what we see as violent, and two, that the basis of this committee is intersectionality. We trust and know that when we center the folks who are most marginalized, those impact all folks. So if we really are looking into the margins and thinking about who is most impacted by this, who is most infected and punished by these systems, then we can really have collective liberation in which all folks can thrive. So it does impact all of the city as well.
I'm just going to add. To add just one more point to that also, I think having the GSA Leadership Committee as the backing for a lot of these policies, as the voice for a lot of these policies, I think also really helps mitigate pushback. I think one of the most isolating experiences that folks have in the district is when they are receiving pushback for trying to open things up for folks like themselves or just the students who absolutely need it, and not really feeling heard, not feeling the support from their administrators. And so I think having a very queer, largely POC-led council that we all get together in order to push forward these policies, because they are policies, they are in writing. Having that support for it, I think really helps us just to build out that network of support around pushback in order to better equip folks to deal with it, and also not having that sheltering presence, that protective presence, so that they are not just receiving the yelling from parents, or they're not the person who have to be the face of it. Providing outside support so that we can share that heavy lift. So.
Thank you, and will all the presenters please come up to the front of the room? Others can please go to the back and have lunch.
Please feel free to talk to us.
Yes.